My name's Abigail, and I never thought I'd be the one standing knee-deep in vineyard mud with the tang of Pinot Noir and guilt staining my lips like a vintage gone sour, watching 7 years of what I'd sworn was a ripe, tangled life with my husband rot away on the vine, the grapes splitting open to spill secrets I thought I'd tucked safely under the canopy, only to realize he'd been out there among the rows all along, his hands steady and silent, pruning back every lie I'd woven into the trellises until I was left bare, staring down the crush of my own betrayal with nothing to shield me from the bitter bite of his knowing gaze, a look that pressed me flat like a grape underfoot during harvest, juice and all. I was 31, tasting room manager at our family-run vineyard, Willow Creek Cellars, nestled in Oregon's Willamette Valley, still limber and quick from lugging cases of bottles up from the cellar and hiking the steep, misty hills to check the blocks, my auburn hair still glossy and thick when I tied it back with a scarf after a long day, dodging the splashes of red wine, the chalk dust from the blackboard specials, and the sticky rings left by spilled rows that marked my shifts pouring flights for tourists and locals alike. Nathan was 33, my husband, the vineyard's viticulturist and the heartbeat of Willow Creek, the kind of man who'd trudge in from the rows with soil caked under his nails and a quiet, crooked grin that used to warm me through the damp chill, who'd pluck a grape from a cluster, test its sugar with a refractometer and murmur, "Perfect this year, Abby," his brown eyes catching the soft glow of the kitchen light when he'd uncork a bottle of our own vintage after a grueling day in the field. We'd met back in 2017 at the International Pinot Noir celebration in McMinnville, a crisp September afternoon with the valley air heavy with the scent of ripe fruit and oak barrels, me pouring samples behind our booth in a sweater and jeans, him wandering up from a rival vineyard with a paper cup in hand, tossing out a, "This Pinot's got soul," with a smile that sank its roots into me like a vine hitting fertile loam, holding me there before I could even think to pull away. That was him. Steady as the earth he worked, earthy in a way that felt like home, the kind of guy who'd spend a Saturday staking trellises in the fog or fine-tuning the irrigation system until it hummed just right, who'd leave me notes scrawled in his blocky handwriting saying "You're my vintage," on the kitchen counter next to his pruning shears or a half-empty bag of coffee I'd swiped from the tasting room. We'd built a life straight out of the dirt. A rented cottage on the vineyard's edge our first year, a little clapboard shack with a leaky roof and a wood stove that barely kept the damp at bay, then a fixer-upper farmhouse just up the hill by 2019 after we took over Willow Creek from Nathan's aging uncle, a weathered 2-story place with a wraparound porch where we'd strung twinkle lights and a cellar that hummed with the musty scent of oak barrels and fermentation, the kind of home you could feel the history in every creak of the floorboards. He was my ballast, kisses pressed quick against my temple after I'd spent a day herding chatty tourists through flights. "I love you, Abs," murmured low over a glass of our rose at the kitchen table, nights sprawled on the couch with a pot of his beef stew cooling on the coffee table and the Great British Bake Off flickering across our second-hand TV, our collie Finn, sprawled across our feet with his wiry fur shedding onto the rug, his snores a soft counterpoint to the rain drumming the tin roof. Friends swore we were made of the same terroir. My dad mailed us jars of his cherry preserves every summer with little notes about his orchard. Nathan's sister crashed on our lumpy pull-out sofa every crush season to help with the picking. Our crew of workers gave a nod or a wave when Nathan's Jeep Wrangler rumbled up the gravel drive beside my muddy Subaru Outback parked under the pines, a rough sketch of valley life etched into the fog that rolled off the Yamhill River, the endless rows of Pinot Noir vines stretching out like veins across the hills, and the faint clatter of a tractor rumbling in the distance. We didn't have kids, talked about it over bottles of our own reserve at Dundee Hills tasting rooms, sprawled on their patios with Finn begging for crumbs, always figured it'd happen later, when the vineyard turned a bigger profit or I hired an assistant. But at 31 I still felt vibrant, grounded, my flannel shirts and faded jeans hiding a body I'd kept fit through the grind of harvest seasons and restless walks among the vines when the tasting room chatter got too loud in my head. 7 years with Nathan had grown into a rhythm I thought was as unbreakable as the roots anchoring our oldest vines, a steady cycle of pruning and pouring I could navigate blind, until I let myself get tangled up with a harvest worker among the rows, thinking the thick canopy of leaves would shield me from the light, whispering my secrets to the grapes like they'd keep them safe. I never thought the vines would talk back, or that Nathan had been out there listening all along, his boots silent in the soil, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, watching every move I made, waiting to press the truth out of me like juice from a cluster too heavy to hold its own weight. It started so soft I didn't catch the rot until it was fermenting right under my nose. A restlessness that crept into my bones like mildew spreading across a damp cluster of grapes while I poured flights for sunburned tourists or scrubbed the tasting room bar with a rag that smelled faintly of vinegar and oak. Nathan and I were solid, or that's what I kept telling myself, muttering it like a prayer under my breath while I wiped down counters sticky with spilled Chardonnay or tallied the day's sales in the quiet hum of the farmhouse after dark. But the years had weathered us down, worn away the lush bloom we'd had back when we'd spend nights tasting half-fermented blends in that cottage, the air thick with the loamy scent of his hands fresh from the rose and the sharp bite of my wine-soaked breath, or when we'd sneak off to make out in the Jeep parked down by the creek that bordered the vineyard, the water gurgling under a swollen harvest moon, his hands rough with calluses sliding under my sweater as crickets buzzed in the cooling dusk, their song weaving into the rustle of the leaves overhead. Those early days were lush, heady, me pouring flights for buyers and chatting up distributors with a smile that came easy, him out in the field coaxing the vines into perfect yields with a patience I'd never seen in anyone else, stealing kisses over charcuterie boards piled with salami and local goat cheese at the Red Hills Market on lazy Sundays, our fingers brushing like tendrils stretching toward sunlight, a connection that felt as natural as the way the grapes swelled under his care. We'd moved in together after a year, a quick leap when my apartment lease in Salem ran out and I was too broke to renew, him saying, "Stay with me, Abs," over a glass of Syrah at Ponzi Vineyards with his knee knocking mine under the table, and it stuck. We signed the lease for that cottage on the vineyard's edge, hauled my wine racks and a rickety table up the gravel path with Finn yipping at our heels like he was part of the crew, laughed until we wheezed when the bed frame creaked and sagged under us that first night, the springs groaning like a bad vintage corked too soon. By year 3, we'd taken over Willow Creek from his uncle, bought the farmhouse with a bank loan and sheer stubbornness. Him in a dirt-streaked Carhartt jacket with the sleeves rolled up, me hunched over a ledger with a calculator, both of us stained with grape juice and sweat after long days of pruning and pressing, playing First Aid Kit or the Decemberists from a scratched-up Bluetooth speaker propped on the porch railing, the valley's hum of distant traffic and the low bellow of a foghorn off the river filtering through the fogged-up windows that never quite sealed out the damp. We tied the knot at year 4, a small, intimate ceremony on the vineyard's highest hill overlooking the Pinot blocks, me in a simple linen dress I'd scored at a boutique in Portland's Pearl District, him in a flannel vest over a white shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders, our friends toasting with flutes of our own Chardonnay and sloppy hugs as the vines rustled in the breeze behind us, their leaves catching the golden light of a late summer evening. It was us, deep-rooted, real, a love I'd have bet my soul on keeping strong through any frost, drought, or pest that threatened the harvest, a bond one thought could weather the valley's unpredictable seasons and come out richer for it. But 7 years in, that love had been pruned back hard. Him up before dawn to check bricks levels or scout for mildew, me in the tasting room by 10 pouring samples for busloads of weekenders from Portland, dinners of his slow-cooked venison roast or my takeout pho from the little spot in Newburgh when I was too wiped to cook, nights where he'd sketch vine maps or soil charts on the couch with a pencil stub while I tallied receipts and updated the vineyard's Instagram beside him, Finn's snores threading through the quiet like a lifeline when our words ran dry. I'd catch him sometimes, his jeans frayed at the hem and patched with duct tape, his faded vineyard cap pulled low over his brow, his hands rough and cracked from a day wrestling with trellis wire or digging soil samples, and feel him slipping away even though he was right there beside me like we were partners running a business instead of lovers sharing a life, 2 vines growing side by side but no longer twining together. I was 31 now, still quick on my feet hauling cases up from the cellar or pacing the vineyard rows at dusk when the tasting room closed, my hair still auburn and full when I didn't let it tangle in the valley's damp air, but the mirror in our cramped bathroom showed the wear, fine lines fanning out from my eyes like cracks in the clay soil after a dry spell, a softness creeping into my jawline that I'd scowl at under the harsh kitchen light, a thirst I couldn't quench even with a pour of Nathan's best reserve Pinot, the kind he'd save for special nights that hadn't come around in a while. Work was steady but draining, pouring endless samples, plastering on a smile for tourists who asked the same questions about oak aging or organic certification, the tasting room a whirlwind of popping corks, clinking glasses, and the constant chatter of people who didn't know a bricks from a barrel. And with Nathan lost in the endless rhythm of the vines, our spark felt like a memory I couldn't uncork, a vintage I'd left on the shelf too long, gathering dust while I told myself it was still good. I didn't plan to stray, I swore to myself I'd never be that woman, the one who'd uproot a promise made under a harvest sky with the scent of fermenting grapes in the air. But a hunger I couldn't name started curling up my spine like a tendril reaching for something to cling to, and the vineyard's sprawling rows, with their thick leaves and shadowed paths, seemed like the perfect place to let it grow wild, to hide it from the light I thought I'd never have to face. It began with him, a harvest worker I hired last fall when the crew was short-handed. Luca, 29, a lean drifter with a Roman accent that rolled off his tongue like a sip of something aged and bold, his hands already knowing the vines like he'd been born to them, his "good soil here, eh?" casual when he showed up in early September for the picking season, dark eyes flicking up from under a faded hoodie with a grin that hit me like a gulp of something too strong after months of sipping Nathan's. Steady, familiar pour, a jolt that woke up parts of me I'd let go dormant. He was all field grit and quiet fire, worn-out hoodie with the cuffs frayed, work boots caked with the valley's red clay. "Need a hand with that?" tossed over his shoulder as he hefted crates of grapes onto the flatbed with an ease that made the other pickers look sluggish. Finn's sharp barks echoing from the farmhouse porch where I'd left him that morning with a pat on the head and a chew toy to keep him busy. It took weeks to ripen, me brushing past him in the rows during thinning, him updating me on yields with "these grapes, they're singing this year," his voice low and warm, our chats stretching from pruning techniques to the wines he'd grown up with in Lazio, his "ever tried a real Montepulciano?" landing easy but rich as he wiped sweat off his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his forehead that I couldn't stop staring at. I didn't mean to linger, kept it to quick nods and small talk at first, leaning on a trellis post while the crew worked the clusters, the air heavy with the sweet musk of ripe fruit and the faint tang of ferment drifting from the crush pad. But by late October, when he handed me a single grape from a bunch he'd just cut, his "taste this one," soft and deliberate, his fingers grazed mine, lingering a beat too long, and I felt it, a heat I'd forgotten I could feel, a pull I didn't snip back like I should've, a tendril curling up that I let take root instead of yanking it out. I didn't know he'd become my secret, or that Nathan had been out there tending to it from the very first bud, his shadow moving silent among the vines, his hands already stained with the truth I thought I'd buried deep. The affair took root fast, a crush I couldn't cork or stopper, a wild growth that spread through me like powdery mildew through a wet season, too quick to control. Nathan's days gave it all the room it needed, early mornings trekking out to the far blocks to check soil pH or scout for pests, late nights hunched over the lab bench testing acidity levels, long hours he'd spend scouting for frost risks, or checking the deer traps along the vineyard's edges, leaving me alone with the harvest crew and the sprawling rows, Finn kennelled in the mudroom with a bone or napping by the hearth with his nose tucked under his tail. Luca slipped into the gaps like water into dry soil, text starting light and innocent, "Vines look good tonight," popping up at 8 p.m. while I sat on the porch with a glass of our unoaked Chardonnay, me tapping back. "They're thriving, thanks," my pulse kicking up a notch as I dimmed the screen under the quilt I'd draped over my lap, Nathan's snores rumbling steady through the open window behind me, Finn's tail thumping a lazy beat against the floorboards inside. It bloomed quick from flirtations in the rows to stolen moments carved out of the vineyard's rhythm. His trailer parked behind the barn, a cramped tin box with a cot, a folding chair and a lantern that cast long shadows, when Nathan thought I was closing up the tasting room late. My Subaru tucked off the dirt road behind a screen of blackberry bushes when I'd claim I was running into town for supplies. A frantic tangle in the vines one dusky evening near Block 12, the leaves rustling around us like a curtain, his hands sliding under my flannel, my breath catching sharp in my throat as the valley cooled and the first stars pricked the sky above. "We're so screwed," I'd laugh, sprawled across his narrow cot with a half-empty bottle of our Pinot Gris rolling on the floor beside us, and he'd grin, his teeth flashing white in the dim light. "Screwed's the best part, no?" Pulling me back into him until the world blurred, until I couldn't tell where my lies ended and his touch began, the guilt a faint fizz I drowned out with every stolen sip of him. I'd come home after, splash cold water on my face in the farmhouse bathroom, reheat a bowl of Nathan's leftover stew in the microwave, sit across from him at the kitchen table when he trudged in from the fields, his pruning shears slung over his shoulder, Finn weaving between his legs with a happy wag, and feel the guilt start to ferment, rising in my chest like a bad batch bubbling over, his "missed you today" abs, soft and unguarded as I nodded back, "You too," hating how smooth the lie rolled off my tongue, how it had gotten so easy to pour it out like a sample for a stranger. I thought I'd corked it tight. Burner phone for texts stashed in my glove box under a stack of vineyard maps, cash for gas or coffee runs so nothing traced back on the joint account, alibis about staying late for inventory, or prepping the wine club shipment, that stretched into the foggy evenings. And Nathan seemed to buy it, or so I told myself, his trust a thick canopy of leaves I ducked under without a second thought, his steady gaze too clouded with vineyard dirt to see the cracks I was leaving behind. I didn't know he'd heard the vines whispering my every step, or that he'd been out there watching from the very start, his boots leaving no trace in the soft soil, his hands already poised to strip my secrets bare. It wasn't just the hookups, it was the bloom, the way Luca saw me. Not Abigail the wife, not Abigail the manager pouring endless flights for tipsy tourists, but Abigail the untamed, the girl who danced barefoot at a harvest party at 24 with the juice of stolen grapes staining her feet, who'd skinny dipped in the creek on a dare one humid August night and laughed until her sides ached as the cold water shocked her skin. He'd text at random hours, "Thinking of your laugh, Bella," and I'd fire back, "Dangerous territory there," smirking into the dark of our bedroom while Nathan slept beside me, his arm heavy across the pillow, thin snores a low drone from the rug by the bed. Out in the rows, it was a dance, his hand brushing mine when he'd pass me a cluster to taste. "Your trouble," Abigail murmured low when I'd drop off a jug of water for the crew, the air between us crackling with something unspoken, alive, a heat I hadn't felt since Nathan and I were new, when every glance was a spark, every touch a flame licking up through the dry tinder of those early days. We stole moments wherever we could. Lunch breaks at the barn, his fingers tracing my wrist over a hunk of bread and a wedge of brie I'd swiped from the tasting room. Errands, to Newburgh when Nathan thought I was picking up labels or corks, my Subaru idling off a back road while we tangled in the back seat, the windows fogging as the valley buzzed beyond. A night in his trailer during the height of crush season, the vines heavy with fruit outside, his breath hot against my neck as I braced against the thin metal wall, the vast quiet of the Willamette Valley swallowing us whole until the only sounds were our ragged gasps and the creak of the cot beneath us. The secrecy made it burn brighter. Every groan of the farmhouse porch steps a spike in my pulse, every sweep of headlights across the driveway a shiver down my spine, every touch a rebellion against the life I'd promised Nathan under that hilltop sky, a life I'd once thought was enough to hold me through any season. "We're done for," I'd pant, breathless and tangled in the vines with him, the scent of crushed grapes rising around us, and he'd laugh, "Dunce my favorite part," his rough hands pulling me under again, his stubble scraping my skin until I forgot the weight of my ring, the vows etched into it fading into the background like a label peeled off a bottle I'd stopped bothering to read. Nathan's world left openings. Days he'd trek out to the back 40 to check irrigation lines or scout for signs of phylloxera. Nights he'd stay late in the barn testing acidity levels, or calibrating the press. Mornings he'd roll in with his boots crusted in loam and his shirt dusted with what he called vine pollen. His voice steady as ever when he'd say he'd been up all night watching for frost, and Luca filled them, his presence seeping into my days like sap into a cracked trunk, his voice humming in my ear through late-night texts, his scent, rich earth, sweat from a day under the sun, a faint whiff of grape must clinging to his skin, overriding Nathan's familiar oak barrels and flannel on the couch cushions where we'd once curled up with Finn wedged between us, a trio that felt like home until it didn't anymore. I'd call Nathan, "How's the field today?" And he'd ramble about a pest count or a block hitting peak ripeness. "Miss you out there, Abs," his voice crackling through the line while I sat on the porch where Luca had kissed me an hour earlier, nodding into the phone. "Miss you too," the lie so polished it gleamed, so routine it didn't even sting anymore, just slipped out like a pour from a bottle I'd opened too many times. I thought I'd trellised it tight, trained every loose shoot back into place. Every move calculated, every alibi watertight, every trace scrubbed clean. Until the harvest came and the vines spilled it all out like a barrel tipped over in the crush pad, juice running red and wild across the ground. The unraveling started slow, a mildew I didn't spot until it was creeping up the stalks. Little signs I brushed off as nothing while I kept tending my secret crop, things I ignored as I poured flights and slipped off with Luca, too drunk on my own deception to notice the rot setting in. Nathan got quieter, his "love you" texts cut to a bare "love you," his eyes sliding away when I'd ask about his day, his time in the field stretching longer with excuses that didn't quite fit. "Need to recheck the north block for mildew. Traps need resetting tonight." And I'd nod, too wrapped up in my own tangle to pull at his threads. too busy dodging my own guilt to see his was growing beside me, silent and steady like a vine he'd let go dormant. Luca got bolder, text sharper. Need you tonight, Bella. At 10 p.m. his, meet me after close, murmured over a crate of grapes with a look that pinned me in place. My heart thudding as I'd stammer a maybe, and duck out before I could commit, the vineyard's quiet hum mocking my hesitation. The crew started whispering too, Jose the picker asking if I'd seen Nathan out late with a raised brow, my friend Claire from the wine club mentioning she'd spotted him near the barn when he'd said he was in the far rows, her tone too casual, too knowing, like she was testing the soil under my feet. I shrugged it off, kept texting Luca, kept sneaking away, kept convincing myself I was in control, until it all burst open, a foggy November day that crushed me under its weight. 7 months into the affair it exploded, crush season in full swing, the air thick with ferment and fog rolling low over the valley, my Subaru humming fine after a tune-up until Luca texted me that afternoon, meet me at the barn, got something for you. A message that landed heavy in my gut while I was wiping down the tasting room bar, the last tour group chattering over their final pours. Nathan was out checking the north rows, had texted at noon, gone, till dusk, frost coming tonight, need to scout. Plenty of time, I figured, to slip over after locking up, the day's chaos of corks and receipts still clinging to my skin as I walked across the gravel lot, Finn at home gnawing a rawhide bone I tossed him before leaving, his big eyes watching me from the porch like he knew I was up to something rotten. I stepped into the barn just past 5, the space dim and smelling of must and diesel, Luca leaning against a barrel with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, a worn notebook in his hand, his read this, casual as he slid it across the wood toward me, the hum of the crusher outside vibrating through the walls. I flipped it open, Nathan's handwriting staring back at me, tight and precise, pages of dates and times. Abby with Luca, Block 12, October 15th, 6 p.m. Voices low. Trailer lights on, October 28th, 11 p.m. Her Subaru by the hedge. Creek path, September 3rd, dusk, saw them. A log of my every move mapped out like a vineyard grid, the vines whispering my secrets back to him in every rustle, every shadow I thought I'd slipped through unnoticed. Then Luca twisted the knife. He's known since August, Abigail. Caught us by the creek that first time, been tracking you since. Told me last week he'd wait till harvest was done to see how far you'd take it, said he wanted the full yield of it. The barn tilted, my knees buckling against the barrel. My affair with Luca, a vine I'd let grow wild and unchecked. Nathan's silence, a pruning knife he'd sharpened all along, his steps soft in the soil, his eyes fixed on every leaf I'd turned, watching, waiting, pressing the truth out of me as the grapes fell heavy and ripe, his harvest hiding our lies until he chose to crush them open, leaving me to choke on the juice of it all.